Have you ever stopped to think that a simple dream could be the invisible line between life and destruction? Have you ever imagined waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something extraordinary has just happened, as if heaven itself had sent you a direct warning? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Today, I want to take you inside a true story, deeply spiritual and full of prophetic meaning. The story of a young woman whose destiny was completely changed by a single dream. And before you think this is just coincidence or imagination, I need to ask you, have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever had that dream that seemed more real than life itself? That warning that kept hammering in your heart, as if God were trying to get your attention? When we talk about prophetic dreams, about warnings sent before destruction, many people don't realize that this still happens today. But it does, and it happens much more often than you imagine. There are times when God speaks in subtle, almost silent ways, and others when he uses exactly what many ignore, a dream. And that's why this story is so impactful. A young woman, seemingly living an ordinary life, received a warning so clear, so direct, during a single night that it couldn't be ignored. It was as if heaven was shouting the truth she needed to hear. Have you ever felt that urgency after waking up? That weight on your spirit that doesn't let you go about your day normally? What makes this testimony even more powerful is that it's not just about emotion or symbolism. It carries a purpose. Testimonies of prophetic deliverances before destruction are not distant or exaggerated stories. They are warnings. They are calls. They are signs that God continues to act, continues to speak, continues to use dreams as an instrument of protection. And when you hear what happened to this young woman, you will realize that no detail was by chance. Perhaps it will even remind you of a situation in your own life. Have you ever received such a warning but didn't realize it? As you listen to this introduction, take a deep breath and let this question sink into your heart. What if what you consider just a dream was, in fact, a deliverance? What if God is trying to show you something now, through this message? Stay with me, because when I tell you this testimony, you will understand the depth of this spiritual calling. You will realize that these deliverances happen before destruction arrives, before the worst happens, and that nothing is by chance when God decides to act. What this young woman experienced wasn't just a moment of fright or an impressive coincidence. It was an awakening. It was a calling. It was proof that the supernatural still touches the natural in a powerful and unexpected way. And as I tell you this story, perhaps something within you will begin to awaken as well. Perhaps this video is exactly the warning, the confirmation, or the alert you needed to receive today. So stay here, because what comes next will show you how a simple dream can carry such a great purpose that it can change the course of an entire life. And it is precisely at this point that her story begins to unfold. And as you let this story sink into your heart, perhaps something inside you is already stirring. Perhaps a memory, an old dream, a feeling you never knew how to explain is returning now, as if God were illuminating something you kept deep inside. And you know, if this topic resonates with you, if this introduction has touched you in some way, I want to invite you to be part of this conversation. Leave a comment below about what has resonated with you so far, because when you share your experience, you not only release something within yourself, but you also strengthen other people who are going through the same things and sometimes feel alone. Believe me, your comment might be exactly what someone needed to read today. And if you feel that this content has value, that this type of prophetic message touches your life and helps you understand more about God's deliverances, then go ahead and leave your like. It may seem like something simple, almost too small, but this greatly helps the video reach other people who need to hear this word. It's as if, by liking it, you are saying, yes, this message needs to reach further. And of course, if you want to continue following real stories, profound testimonies, and messages that awaken the spirit, subscribe to the channel here. Your participation here is what makes this space grow. It's what gives strength for more content like this to be produced and sent to those who really need it. Each subscription is like a sign that this purpose is alive, that there is an entire community walking together, listening, learning, and being transformed. But stay with me, because there's still something very important in this story that I want to show you. We're only at the beginning of this testimony, and the next point will help you understand more deeply what was really behind this dream and how it became a turning point in that young woman's life. For a very long time, even before formal records existed, humankind has carried this profound feeling that the invisible speaks, that something beyond our logic tries to reach us while we sleep. And when we look at the Bible, we realize that this is not just a feeling, not just imagination. It is a spiritual reality that spans centuries. God has always used dreams as tools for warning, guidance, and deliverance. Joseph of Egypt had dreams that not only revealed his own identity but also announced a gigantic change in the history of an entire nation. Joseph, the father of Jesus, received crucial warnings in dreams, warnings that literally saved the boy's life. Daniel had profound revelations that showed hidden truths, messages that have transcended time and are still part of our prophetic understanding today. And when you perceive this pattern, you understand that dreams have never been just loose images from our minds. Often, they are spiritual channels that carry clear symbolism, urgency, directions, and even decisions that need to be made. When I think about the young woman in our story, and how that dream completely altered the course she was about to take, it's impossible not to see the same pattern. Nothing there seemed random. The intense feeling upon waking, the spiritual weight, the clarity of the images, the feeling that there was a hidden warning behind every detail, all of this reveals something much bigger happening behind the scenes of her life. It's as if the dream was placed there not to frighten, but to awaken, to shake her mindset, to provoke a transformation that perhaps wouldn't happen otherwise. And how often does this happen to us too? Sometimes, a dream comes loaded with symbolism that doesn't make sense at the time, but continues to echo within the soul, as if asking to be interpreted, understood, embraced. And the truth is that there is something very profound in warning dreams. They don't arrive as beautiful stories. They arrive as something that nudges the conscience. It's that urgency that makes a person wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, breathing heavily, with the feeling that something is about to happen. Some describe it as a premonition, others as a fleeting vision, others as a shocking scene that won't leave their head. But the point is that, when God speaks through dreams, He touches sensitive areas where decisions need to be made, where paths need to be corrected, where a hidden truth needs to finally be seen. It is in these moments that the dream ceases to be just an experience and becomes a revelation. The young woman also went through this. At first, she thought it was just an overwhelming nightmare, but she couldn't ignore the emotional impact that dream carried. It was as if a message was behind every detail, asking to be understood. Some people spend years trying to decipher signs, but when a dream truly comes from God, it doesn't bring confusion. It brings a kind of purposeful restlessness. A feeling that isn't despair, but a calling. And that changes everything because it makes the person see their own journey with new eyes. They begin to realize that danger isn't always in what is visible, but in what lies behind the choices, the distractions, the seemingly harmless paths. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is something special about the way God arranges each piece. When He decides to speak through a dream, nothing is out of place. The urgency is specific. The symbols have logic. The narrative has a thread that connects directly to real life. And that is exactly what differentiates an ordinary dream from a prophetic dream. While an ordinary dream dissolves throughout the day, a prophetic dream remains, insists, returns to the mind as if it were a silent reminder. It's as if God were saying, "Pay attention, there is something here for you." And when the person listens, when they truly decide to analyze it seriously, something begins to move within them. It's as if the mind, heart, and spirit align to understand what was hidden. This young woman, without realizing it, was embarking on a journey of spiritual understanding. She didn't know that this dream would be a turning point in her life, but she began to notice internal changes. Small signs around her began to fit with the dream, as if they were silent confirmations. And that's the most impressive part. When God wants to prevent something bad from happening, He doesn't just show the danger. He also shows the path to deliverance. Sometimes it's a door that closes. Sometimes it's a feeling of discomfort that prevents a wrong step. Sometimes it's a word that appears at the exact moment. All of this is part of this divine construction that many people call coincidence, but which, in reality, is care, guidance, and protection. And perhaps, as you hear this story, you too are remembering something you've experienced. Maybe you had a dream that still seems too heavy, too strong to ignore. Maybe you felt there was a message behind it, but never fully understood what it meant. And this is more common than it seems. Many people hold on to dreams like this for years, without realizing that there was a calling, a warning, an opportunity for change. That's why it's so important to bring this topic to light, to talk about these experiences, to understand how God continues to use simple elements to reveal profound things. It is in this exchange, in this reflection, in this opening of consciousness, that many people discover truths that were hidden within themselves. If any of this resonated with you, comment below. This makes sense to me. The young woman experiencing this story never imagined that something so profound would happen to her on that particular night. It was an ordinary day, one of those that pass almost unnoticed. Nothing extraordinary had happened, no remarkable conversations, no premonitions during the day. She went to sleep as she always did, tired but peaceful, believing she would have just another night of rest. But little did she know that, as she closed her eyes, she was about to enter one of the most impactful experiences of her journey. Still at the beginning of the dream, everything seemed hazy, as if she were walking inside a familiar place, but at the same time strange, as if there were a hidden truth behind every detail. The first sensation that took hold of her was not fear, it was alertness. A kind of inner vibration, as if something were saying, "Pay attention." Gradually, the atmosphere became clearer. She found herself on a street that strongly resembled one from her childhood, but with altered colors, deeper shadows, and a silence that didn't seem natural. It was the kind of silence that disturbs, that weighs on the chest. And as she walked, she noticed a figure in the distance. It wasn't possible to distinguish the face, but there was a strong, firm presence, as if that figure had been placed there for a specific purpose. Even without words, the atmosphere around her changed, as if a message was about to be revealed. The young woman's heart began to race, and she describes feeling, at that moment, that she was inside something bigger, as if she were being invited to see beyond the obvious. When the figure finally drew closer, she heard a voice, not booming, but striking, the kind that lingers even after the sound fades. The message was short, but laden with urgency. "Don't go that way." She tried to look back, tried to understand why, but with each passing second the dream seemed to grow more intense. The shadows moved, the air grew heavy, and she felt an imminent danger she couldn't identify. Fear arose, but it wasn't ordinary fear. It was a fear that brought direction, as if it were a warning to save her from something real. And that's a characteristic of prophetic dreams. Even when they cause unease, they bring meaning, purpose, direction. The young woman woke suddenly, her breathing rapid and with a profound feeling that she needed to do something immediately. It was the middle of the night, but she couldn't fall back asleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand what she had just experienced. The vividness of the dream was unlike anything she had ever felt before. The words, the emotions, the figure, everything seemed more real than life itself. And the more she tried to ignore it, the more that sense of alert grew within her, as if she had been marked to make an important decision that morning. What she didn't imagine was that, in the early hours of the following day, everything would make sense. As she left home to follow her usual routine, she realized that the path she usually took, the same path the figure in the dream had told her to avoid, was blocked. A serious accident had occurred exactly at the time she would have been passing by. It wasn't just a coincidence. The young woman felt such a strong emotional impact that her hands trembled. She needed to stop for a few minutes, take a deep breath, and absorb what was happening. It was as if, suddenly, the dream had materialized in real life. That warning had been a direct deliverance, a detour from a danger she didn't even know she was about to face. And when she realized this, tears streamed down her face without her even trying. It was a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the feeling of having been cared for by something greater than herself. Many would call it luck, but she knew, deep down, that it hadn't been just a coincidence. That experience had shaken her mindset, her way of seeing the world, her perception that there is a spiritual backstage working in moments we don't even imagine. From that day on, she began to pay more attention to the signs, the sensations, the revelations that sometimes arise subtly, but carry an enormous purpose. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this story isn't just about a dream or an isolated warning. It's about how small divine interventions can completely transform a person's destiny. It's about decisions that change paths, about perceptions that awaken consciousness, about moments when something seemingly simple takes on extraordinary meaning. The young woman understood that this deliverance wasn't just physical protection. It was also a call to look inward, to reconsider choices, to awaken spiritually. Often, transformation begins exactly like this, in unexpected moments that reveal truths hidden within us. Perhaps you've already experienced something similar. A strong feeling, a sudden shift, an intuition that didn't make sense at the time but later proved to have saved you from something bigger. Or perhaps you've had a dream that left a mark, that kept echoing, even when you tried to ignore it. And this doesn't happen by chance. There are moments when God speaks in such personal, such specific ways, that it would be impossible not to recognize that there is a purpose involved. Sometimes, a dream isn't just a dream. It's a beginning, an opening, a chance to realize that there's more happening around you than meets the eye. If you're feeling this connection while listening to this story, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." When the young woman looked at that dream a second time, already awake and trying to understand every detail, something within her began to change. It was as if a hidden truth was beginning to reveal itself, as if that experience had been more than a simple effect of her imagination. Because, deep down, she felt an unease she couldn't ignore. And no matter how much she tried to explain it rationally, there was a weight, a depth to that warning that made everything around her seem quieter, as if the environment itself was waiting for her to understand something. It's interesting how, at certain moments in life, a situation as simple as waking up startled in the middle of the night can carry an entire message. And the more she reflected on it, the more she realized that that dream wasn't just a strong image in her mind. It was as if it had been placed there purposefully, intentionally, with a precision that didn't align with coincidence. She remembered every detail, the wind that seemed to speak, the street she knew so well, but which in the dream seemed laden with a different meaning, almost as if it were a staged scene designed to make her notice a nearby danger. The figure that called her name, not with despair, but with authority. And the feeling that she wasn't simply running away from something, but being led away from something that hadn't yet happened. At that moment, she began to understand that there are dreams that don't come to confuse, but to awaken a new mindset, a more sensitive way of perceiving one's own journey. And however strange it may seem, this type of experience usually happens precisely when a person is distracted by routine, living on autopilot without noticing what is approaching. Gradually, it began to dawn on her. The sense of urgency the dream provoked wasn't emotional, it was spiritual. And this realization brought her a mixture of fear and gratitude, because God doesn't always speak through the obvious. Often he whispers where no one else pays attention. And when these warnings arrive, they usually come disguised as something simple, a discomfort, a fleeting vision, a phrase that echoes in the mind, or, as in her case, a dream that seemed perfectly ordinary until it revealed its true impact. She began to understand that certain revelations don't come to frighten, but to transform. They are like lights turned on behind the scenes of life, showing that there is intense care behind every detail of the journey. And this awareness opens space for something even deeper, the certainty that God warns before destruction. He prepares before danger. He alerts before the fall. It doesn't matter if the warning comes as a vision, an insight, or a seemingly confusing dream. When it is he who speaks, something within the person recognizes it. And that's exactly what happened to that young woman. The moment she saw her dream fulfilled before her eyes, everything made sense. Every scene, every word, every sensation that seemed exaggerated at the time. And when she realized she had escaped something that could have changed her entire life, her heart trembled in a different way, not with fear, but with gratitude. Because there is no such thing as chance when the purpose is to prevent you from being harmed. There is no such thing as luck when deliverance comes from a God who acts in silence, but who never fails. That's why this story carries so much spiritual weight. It doesn't just speak of a random dream, but of a clear message, sent at the exact right time. And this understanding changes the way we see everything, our decisions, our sensitivity, our steps. Because when you understand that God cares even about things you can't imagine, you begin to realize how many times you were protected without noticing. How many times you were guided without understanding. How many times you were warned, but confused the warning with something commonplace. And this perspective brings about a true transformation, because it changes your mindset. It makes you look at the signs with more attention and less resistance. After all, not everything that seems small is irrelevant. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's an important point in this story that many people overlook. The dream wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation to perceive the spiritual world in a more conscious way. It was as if God was showing, directly and personally, that he acts before any disaster approaches. And when you understand this dynamic, you realize that the greatest impact of this experience isn't just in the deliverance itself, but in the understanding that comes after it. It's as if something opens up inside the person and they finally see the journey from a more mature, more awakened, more attentive angle. Because the true power of a prophetic dream isn't in the fear it causes, but in the clarity it produces. And this clarity is what reveals the mercy behind it all. It wasn't simply a distant warning. It was intimate, detailed, specific care. It was God leaning in to show that destruction does not reach those who choose to listen to his voice, even when it comes in unexpected ways. And this understanding brings a beautiful responsibility, learning to discern these signs, to value these warnings, and to recognize that nothing is by chance when he is guiding history. As she reflected on all of this, something within her began to profoundly change. There was a new perception, as if a window had been opened. She began to question how many other times God might have spoken, but she simply hadn't noticed. And this thought opened the way for a transformation that surpassed her initial fear. Now there was an understanding, a renewed sensitivity, a different willingness to pay attention to spiritual details. And this new attitude began to influence her decisions, her behavior, her way of interpreting the signs around her. It was as if the journey had gained a new light. And this is where everything begins to connect with something even greater, because when a person understands that God speaks before destruction, they begin to look at each experience with a different perspective. And this change is not superficial. It is profound, silent, and extremely powerful. They realize that they were not only saved from danger but led to an understanding that will accompany them for the rest of their lives. And this opens the door to even more intense revelations, because when the heart is sensitive, spiritual perception expands in a way that transforms everything around it. Comment below, this makes sense to me. When the young woman's story began circulating among those close to her, many wondered how she managed to realize that the dream wasn't just a figment of her imagination. And this is a question many people ask silently, because deep down everyone has had a dream that affected them in a different way, that seemed to carry a weight, a meaning, a message that transcended the ordinary. That's why this part of the testimony cannot be ignored, because it opens a path of understanding that goes far beyond the young woman's individual experience. It touches on our own capacity to discern when God is trying to communicate something important, even if it's through something seemingly simple like a night scene, a quick dialogue, or an image that suddenly appears while we sleep. Many people have doubts because they don't know exactly how to differentiate a common dream from one that comes as a warning. And this uncertainty ends up generating confusion, leading many people to discard experiences that could have been key to important decisions. That's why understanding these signs makes such a difference on the spiritual journey. Because God doesn't always work through what is obvious. He moves in silence, behind the scenes, in the subtext of life, using elements that, at first glance, seem small, but which carry an enormous impact when interpreted with sensitivity. And when a person learns to pay attention, they realize that he always leaves marks, clues, directions for those who are willing to listen. One of the first signs that reveals a dream may have divine origin is when it repeats itself. It's not simply the same scenario returning, but the same message insisting, as if the heart were being pulled to perceive something that is being ignored. God doesn't repeat things by chance. He repeats them to emphasize. When something needs to be understood, he makes every effort to draw attention. And this repetition, which often causes discomfort, doesn't come to frighten, but to align the person's mindset with what he is trying to show. Another important sign is when the dream brings a direct warning. It doesn't have to be something dramatic or cinematic. Sometimes it's a phrase, a gesture, a feeling so vivid that it seems to pierce through sleep and touch consciousness. And the most curious thing is that, in these cases, the person wakes up with the impression that they need to do something, change something, avoid a certain path, or make a specific decision. It's as if the spirit is trying to convey an urgency that the rational mind hasn't yet understood. And this urgency is one of the clearest signs that God is speaking. There are also those dreams that leave such a strong emotional mark that they linger throughout the day. You wake up and, even without fully understanding, you know that something has been communicated. It's not fear, it's not gratuitous anxiety. is a purposeful restlessness, something that nudges and makes the heart pay attention. And usually, this type of dream is accompanied by small confirmations that arise soon after. Someone says something that connects, a situation suddenly appears, a feeling ignites. They are like pieces of a spiritual puzzle that begin to fit together, bringing understanding to what seemed confusing at the beginning. And when this process begins to happen, the person realizes that God speaks in far more varied ways than they imagine. He uses dreams to open paths, to prevent wrong decisions, to reveal hidden truths, and even to protect from situations that are still in the future. But for this, sensitivity, attention, and a willingness to see beyond the obvious are necessary. Because those who live on autopilot rarely perceive the subtle signs that precede major events. Therefore, developing discernment is like adjusting the focus of a lens. What previously seemed blurry begins to gain clarity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something essential in this process that many people ignore. It's not enough to just have a powerful dream. You need to know how to interpret its impact. God never awakens someone without a purpose. When He speaks, something within the person changes. Sometimes it's a small, almost imperceptible change, but it affects how they see their own decisions. Other times, it's a more intense change that flips the mindset and forces the person to look at issues they've been avoiding for a long time. And it is precisely this internal change that reveals the spiritual origin of the dream. When a dream comes from God, it doesn't behave like a mere fragment of imagination. It acts as an invitation to a new perception. It transforms the journey, alters expectations, brings silent revelations that remain even as time passes. And the most surprising thing is that the more a person opens themselves to this sensitivity, the more they realize that nothing is random. That every detail was placed there to guide, to orient, to illuminate paths that were dark. It is this awareness that awakens the capacity for discernment with spiritual maturity. And the truth is that this sensitivity doesn't arise from nothing. It is cultivated. It grows to the same extent that a person learns to listen, observe, and reflect on what they are experiencing. God doesn't hide His warnings. He reveals them in ways that make sense to each person, according to their history, their temperament, their needs. That's why, for some, He speaks through long and detailed dreams. For others, through quick scenes that leave a profound feeling upon waking. And for still others, through signs that multiply in daily life, connecting with the dream in an almost cinematic way. When a person begins to understand these patterns, they realize that God is much more present behind the scenes of life than they imagined. And this understanding changes everything. It changes their posture, their sensitivity, and the way they interpret what is happening around them. It's a type of transformation that doesn't depend on grand manifestations, but on small moments when the heart perceives that something greater is happening. And the more this perception grows, the more clearly the person sees the warnings, the guidance, and the deliverances that were there all along, but which only now begin to make sense. Every dream with a divine purpose carries a kind of spiritual mark. It doesn't easily fade from memory. It repeats itself in the mind as a constant reminder, drawing attention to something that still needs to be understood. And it is precisely this persistence that reveals its origin. Because God doesn't warn just once. He repeats, confirms, reinforces, until the person understands what needs to be done. And when they finally understand, a new kind of clarity emerges, bringing security, direction, and a profound sense of being guided. And it is at this point that everything begins to connect with the next part of this journey. Because when discernment is activated, the person begins to perceive not only dreams, but all the spiritual movement around them. Something within them expands and understanding deepens, as if a new stage were beginning naturally and inevitably. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. When we reach this point in the story, something curious happens. Many people feel a lump in their throat without being able to explain exactly why. And that's natural, because testimonies of prophetic deliverances are not just beautiful accounts or exciting coincidences. They carry a spiritual force that touches deep areas of the heart, places that sometimes the person didn't even know were dormant. And that's exactly why the story of the young woman, with that dream so clear and full of purpose, moves so many people. Because in some way it awakens the awareness that perhaps God is also trying to speak to each of us, often throughout our entire lives, but we are not always listening. It's impossible to ignore when such testimony connects with personal experiences. Sometimes it's a shiver, sometimes it's a thought that arises out of nowhere, sometimes it's the feeling that the story is describing exactly what someone is experiencing at the moment. And this identification doesn't happen by chance. There are times when life presents us with messages that seem to come with a hidden truth behind them, as if there were something greater guiding the way, aligning situations, reorganizing decisions, creating opportunities for the person to see what was previously going unnoticed. That's why this type of content isn't just informative, it's transformative. It affects mindset, spiritual sensitivity, and how a person interprets the signs that appear along their own journey. Often, God uses exactly this type of testimony to illuminate areas that were dark, to reveal confusing directions, to awaken a complacent heart. And this perception has a profound impact because the person begins to realize that nothing they are experiencing is random. There is always a spiritual backdrop moving, guiding, correcting, protecting. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about prophetic deliverances, we're not just talking about warnings about physical dangers or specific situations. We're talking about calls to the heart, silent invitations for the person to stop, breathe, reflect, and realize that perhaps they are going down a path that wasn't designed for them. How many times does God try to reach someone through small details, subtle signs, almost imperceptible sensations? How many times does he gently whisper in their spirit, trying to awaken them to something they insist on not seeing? It is at this point that each testimony ceases to be just a distant story and becomes a spiritual mirror. And this is where the reflection becomes even deeper, because upon hearing such a powerful account as that of the young woman, the human heart is invited to pause and look inward. Perhaps God is showing an area that needs adjustment. Perhaps he is pointing out a relationship that is not healthy, a habit that is diverting focus, a decision that needs to be reconsidered. Or perhaps he is simply reminding the person that they are not alone, that he accompanies them even when they don't realize it, that he speaks in ways that go beyond the rational. This type of message resonates deeply because it awakens awareness, activates sensitivity, and realigns priorities. And the truth is that many people live right on the edge between listening and ignoring. They live in a rush, on autopilot, believing that everything is just a matter of chance, that nothing really has a defined purpose. But when such a testimony reaches them, something begins to change. It's as if a door opens and, suddenly, the person realizes that God has always been trying to get closer, that he has always been sending warnings, whispers, impressions, small revelations along the way. And that changes everything because when the heart awakens, life changes direction. And this change doesn't necessarily mean a major external transformation. It's not always about moving to a new city, changing jobs, or making radical decisions. Sometimes transformation begins in silence, in the way a person sees themselves, in how they perceive their own mistakes, in the decisions they reconsider, in the courage they find to take a new direction. When God awakens someone through a dream, a sign, or a word, he is trying to realign something internal, something deep, something that may have been disordered for a long time. And this alignment brings clarity, peace, and direction. And perhaps that's why you're not watching this video by chance. Perhaps, just as happened with the young woman in that testimony, there's something in your path that's about to change. Perhaps you too are receiving signs that seem too small to take seriously, but which, in fact, carry enormous spiritual weight. Perhaps God is drawing your attention to something that needs to be reviewed, adjusted, or abandoned. And that perception in itself already shows that the heart is sensitive, willing, attentive, and that is too precious to be ignored. When God sends a warning, he doesn't do it to generate fear. He does it to protect, to guide, to show that there is still time, that there is still a way out, that there is still a better path than the one that seemed inevitable. And this kind of deliverance is a powerful reminder that divine mercy reaches even the most unexpected moments of our routine. He speaks before the fall, before the mistake, before the pain, and it is up to each person to decide whether they will listen, whether they will interpret, whether they will give space for this message to produce transformation. And when you realize this, the weight of the testimony becomes even greater. It ceases to be just a moving story and becomes a call to spiritual awakening, an invitation to reconsider, to pay attention, to truly listen. There are times when God uses exactly this type of content to stir up hardened areas, to break down internal resistance, to rekindle a sensitivity that has been lost over the course of life. And when this sensitivity awakens, the person begins to notice that nothing is a coincidence. Every detail, every word, every sensation seems to carry a greater meaning. And this understanding opens the way for the next part of this journey, because when the heart opens, when consciousness awakens, when spiritual perception begins to expand, everything around takes on a different meaning. It's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of an even deeper understanding of how God acts, warns, protects, and transforms. Comment below, this makes sense to me. If you've stayed with me this far, that already shows that this message spoke to you on some deeper level. So, before we wrap up, I wanted to make you a very simple invitation. If what you heard here helped you, clarified something for you, or brought you peace, consider subscribing to the channel. It's just a way for us to continue walking together through these reflections that are so empowering. And if you want to show me that you made it to the very last second, leave a comment here saying, "This message was for me." I always take a look, and it's special to see who really follows the journey to the end. Take the opportunity to leave a like, not out of habit, but because this connection between us today really helps keep this type of content alive and reaching other people who need it. And look, before you go, there's a video over here that perfectly complements what we just talked about. If it makes sense to you, click on it and continue watching. Just follow the